lot of good stuff today. Busy weekend as usual. Looking forward to a busy week as well. And today is not just the debut of this program, it's also the debut of our Horn Top 20 Countdown, the annual right of August, where we count down the number one teams. And it just so works out, Rod, that today is 20 shows. We'll have 20 shows between now and the Longhorn opener with the Rice Owls on September the 2nd.
Nice.
Which means we can spotlight a different team over the next 20 shows and get to number one. And we're going to start with the Texas Tech Red Raiders at number 20. You and I were kicking this around on text message last night because we want this to be our poll. Are you a believer at because I looked at some composite polls of where everybody's kind of ranked in the preseason. It's all speculative, but right around 20, 22, 19 I saw for Texas Tech. That's about where they have them. So we felt like for our first one, get a Big 12 team in here and talk some Texas Tech football. You buying them?
Well, I like Texas Tech. I do. I just wonder in this Big 12 conference if they're going to be able to replicate some of the mojo they had last year. And I'll give Joey Maguire a ton of credit for that mojo, by the way. He made their luck last season. He went for it on fourth down more than any team in the country, and won them. Honestly, I think he won them probably 3 games last year that they may not have won without that aggressive mentality of going for it on fourth down more than anybody else. Think about it. You beat U of H by 3, beat Texas by 3, both in overtime. You beat Oklahoma in overtime as well by 3, and you had a 4-point win versus Iowa State. Hell, man, just going for it on fourth down, that alone gave him an extra 6 points per game. A couple of wins right there.
Yeah, and obviously does the Big 12 catch up with that, with Joey Maguire no longer the element of surprise with his coaching staff. To talk more about this year's Texas Tech Red Raiders, why there is so much excitement out in Lubbock, Texas, and if it's warranted, let's go to the Vaqueros Cafe and Cantina Hotline whenever we talk all things Texas Tech. It's Chris Level, Red Raiders Sports. He's the publisher there, also does radio, works with the athletic department. Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing good, fellas. Thanks for having me on this morning.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Fourth down and going for it freaked everybody out for a while, man. I'm sitting over there going, "What is going on?" It's like unlike anything. It's like unlike anything I'd ever seen. But more often than not, it worked.
And to Rod's point right there, Chris, I mean, that element of surprise, the Joey Maguire, impact. Is that a concern for you that the Big 12 coaches have had all offseason to kind of catch up with what they're doing? Or do you think, because that felt like to me that they were playing their best football at the end of the year with the run through the bowl game and 4-game win streak to finish it? What are your concerns for Texas Tech, and what are you most optimistic about?
I think they would tell you that they don't want to have to go for it on fourth down as much this year, just because I think last year, though, you have 3 different starting quarterbacks. I think, you needed to level the playing field a bit. And I think that, that they were very analytics driven. I think he won't sway from that. I think it is what it is. And they kind of call plays with the intent of, hey, man, if there's a magic number here, if we get this much on third down, then we're going. And it depends on the score and all those things. Now, they got down in some of those games last year, and maybe that's because you just had some lack of continuity at quarterback. I think they would hope that they have a starting quarterback for all season long, which would certainly help. And then you just play better football, so you're not in the need to have to go for it as much. But I do think, to y'all's point, there's a lot of hype around this team, and I think a lot of that has to do with the way they finished the season. They were 4-5 at one point, and then they never lost again. So I think that's as big a reason as why as anything. And Tyler Shuck was the main reason, for he kind of came back and settled in, and then they played really good ball and then obviously won the bowl game handily. So I think a lot of that has to do with the way they finished, because you're sitting there at 4-5 and you're like, man, may not even make it to a bowl game, or you're gonna, you could be in a end up at 6-6 or something. But they kind of controlled their own destiny there and played really good ball. And so I think that, and most of these guys are all back. They didn't lose a lot at all. 16 super seniors on this team.
Wow. Hey, Chris, I want to ask you, because I think it's, apropos that the first Texas Tech Red Raider to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame is something you guys are celebrating too with Zach Thomas. And he was on the defensive side of the ball, and defense now has a different culture there in Lubbock than it did, obviously, during the years where Mike Leach championed the air raid there and maybe defense wasn't emphasized as much. There's a defensive culture brewing in Lubbock. Am I right?
Yeah, and I mean, I thought Zach did a phenomenal job with the speech. I mean, he's a typical West Texas Tech guy, undersized, got the most out of everything he had, and just was really smart. And I mean, it was really fun to see him have that moment because I remember those, big days when I was a student back in the mid '90s, and he had some big plays against Texas A&M, and I mean, it's just fun to kind of see that journey come to an end for him and end up in the Hall of Fame, but. Yeah, you're right. I think Keith Patterson deserves a lot of credit. He was the previous defense coordinator. He's now the head coach at Abilene Christian. He was on Matt Wells' staff, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for kind of the turnaround defensively here. And then you have the 7th pick in the draft last year on the defensive side of the ball. So I think that kind of goes a long way as well. But most of where these super seniors are on the defensive side of the ball. Their starting corners are back. Their defensive tackles are back. They've got, I think, 8 or 9 different starters. I mean, they even had a safety that played a ton of football for him last year, Reggie Pearson, that got replaced in bowl practices by a guy that you guys should know, Tyler Owens. And so Reggie Pearson's like, well, I'm not going to start, so I'm not going to stick around here. And so I just think there's a lot of age and maturity and experience on that side of the ball. But Tim DeRuyter has come in, and he's done a phenomenal job with – and look, when you go for it on 4th down as much as they do, you get put in some binds. But he's kind of, either just kind of tricked his kids into going, that's okay. We're I think he always says, we're the firemen. We put out the fire. And we're not sure where that fire is going to start, I mean, and so – and like a lot of defenses, you judge it on, do you force field goal attempts? Do you force, some different things? And do you tighten up in the red zone? And they were all really good in a lot of those categories last year.
He is Chris Level. When we talk Red Raider sports, he is our guy, and why not? He does a little bit of everything over there with publisher of Red Raider Sports on Twitter, on the website there. Also, he's does the podcast Locked On Texas, Locked On Tech. You can follow him at Chris Level on Twitter if you're looking for him. Hey, Chris, you mentioned the defensive tackles, and when you start in the middle, with guys like Jalen Hutchins and Tony Bradford Jr., 82 tackles, 7 sacks last year, might be the best combination of tackles in the Big 12. That's a good place to start with the defense. Where else are they strong?
Yeah, I think those guys, it's very unique for a couple of D tackles to be kind of, in some ways, the face of your program. It's very bizarre. They have unbelievable personalities. They've been around here because they're kind of unicorns from the standpoint of the 5 or 6 years at a one spot. They've been extremely productive. They could have. Jalen Hutchins definitely had a decision to make last year in the offseason to kind of, he got a middle round grade from the NFL. I think Tony Bradford wants to work in the police department kind of and do some different things there. But I think they just felt like there was some unfinished business here, and I think they love Joey. NIL plays a factor there, but that's just, it's kind of just an interesting situation when those two guys are just kind of the face of your program in some ways. But again, I mentioned that they've got both starting corners back. I think their secondary is very, very strong. I think they're the one weak spot on the team, or question mark, I should say, is inside linebacker. And that's where they lost a couple of guys last year named Krishawn Merriweather and Kosai Eldridge that played nearly every game and extremely durable and productive. But they're really deep and strong everywhere else. And Joey, he will tell you that the defensive line this year is maybe better overall than it was last year. And he's willing to tell you, look, we don't have anybody as dynamic as Tyree, but the totality of the group may be better just because they've got depth and all those things. And then they bring back, I think, 10 or 11 starters on offense, depending on how you want to view that. But the way that the bowl game played out, everybody's back. And so here's my question about this team. Their strength is their lack of weakness. However, do they have enough star power? Do you have a Deuce Vaughn? Do you have a Quentin Johnston? Do you have a guy that can go, a Xavier Worthy? Do you have a guy that can go win you a game when maybe things aren't going well or make a play? And not that necessarily that Tyree did that, although he affected many games. But that's kind of the question. They really are just solid everywhere. There's not really any questions on paper with this team, but do you have enough star power and a dude that can just make something of nothing when the time comes, and maybe you need something like that to happen. That would be my question. I think it's a fair question to ask.
Certainly seems to be. We know Tyler Shuck is back at quarterback, and as Joey Maguire is quick to point out, when he starts and finishes a game, they're undefeated when he's been at Texas Tech, but his health is a big factor. Rod?
Hey, Chris, let me ask you, just kind of staying on the offensive side of the ball, when we were looking at the all preseason selections by the Big 12 media, they were really high on Jerand Bradley. Can you tell people who are not really familiar with his skill set and what he offers, why he was picked first team, picked to be an all Big 12 media selection in the preseason?
Yeah, he was a freshman All-American last year. He's about 6'5". I think that the question you have with him is, does he have just elite level speed? But what he does have is he's very physical. He kind of plays the position like as a basketball player, which is what he was in high school, and I think had some chances to play some basketball in some smaller colleges. But he's kind of just coming into his own, guys, and I think that it's time for him to kind of take that next step. I think there's people around here that feel like this could be his last year here as he's draft eligible after this year. Would he have a decision to make? Possibly. And I think, though, that he's kind of the number one, if you will, from a wideout standpoint. And I think he is somebody that it's all in front of him. He's just got to go do it now. But the measurables are big time. He's 6'5", 210, 215. Great ball skills, goes up and gets it and things like that. He's just not going to run away from too many people. Although, like I said, I think he's gotten a bit better there, a bit faster and things like that. But, yeah, he's kind of – and they brought every receiver back. They didn't lose one receiver that played meaningful snaps last year. So you've got Miles Price and Loic Fungi. They brought Dre McCray in from Austin Peay, who should be their fastest guy. I mean, and Dre McCray, I think, lit up Bama last year for like 110-plus yards receiving in a game in the non-conference. So he's the guy that can kind of stretch the defense, but they're all back, and that's kind of why – it leads into some hype around this group.
And rightfully so, potentially. I like the way you put that. Solid everywhere, but do they have enough star power? And Taj Brooks will be the lead running back in the backfield, so a lot of familiar names with the Red Raiders and Joey Maguire. Hey, Chris, appreciate it. Look forward to more conversations in the future, and thanks for the overview. Number 20 in our countdown, the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Thank you, Chris.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. You boys have a good week and keep hope alive. Thanks.
Thanks,
Certainly
Chris.
will.
You're
Get
the
your
man.
guns out there. It's Chris Level. On Twitter, at Chris Level, Level. And, yeah, publisher, Red Raider Sports, does the sidelines like you used to do, Rod, for Texas.
Yeah. No, he's fantastic.